All right. Good morning, everyone. Namaskara. I know it's your second day here, and since it is a holiday, people are still coming in and just grabbing their coffees. But we'll slowly get started and with the session. I actually came here about now it must be what, Rajan? How long is it that we came here?
2.5 months back.
I think it was much longer than that. No.
September.
Anyways, when we came first to IMB to scout for a partner for this year's inSIG, we were really crossing our fingers that that we'll get it, and we just loved this room particularly. The classic setup, and we really loved it. So it's really great to see that it's actually happening, and that to see everybody here. So that's really great, and a lot of familiar faces from the Bengaluru chapter. So that's nice to see as well. And I'm really glad to be here. So my name is Patrick Paiska, and today I'll moderate this first session together with some great panelists, and we'll speak about a couple of topics. So the way we want to structure it is that we'll do some introductions first, and then we'll have a couple of rounds of questions, and we are really requested to keep sufficient time for a Q&A at the end. So I'll try to get us through it in a hopefully not too boring way, an interesting way, and then I hope that you engage in the conversation and get us through the topic. That's kind of the plan. So now I have to really refer to my notes just to introduce the panelists here. And so I started to my left is Nimita. So she's a program director at Saksham and senior fellow and program director with a global initiative for inclusive ICT. She serves as a chairperson of the Committee on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities at the Broadband India Forum. Nimita was a founding member of the Bangalore not-for-profit research organization Center for Internet and Society, CIS, where she built up the Accessibility and Inclusion Program on digital accessibility, which gained significant recognition within India and internationally. She has received many awards for her work, including the National Award from the President of India in 2010. Her educational background includes degrees in law, German, and music. So at least we have something in common there with the German language. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. All right, I'll continue in the same order. It's just coincidentally that we are sitting like this. So next is Amitabh. He has over 4 decades of corporate and non-profit work experience, out of which for nearly 3 decades he has held senior management positions in the telecommunication industry and various non-for-profit, non-profit internet and non-government organizations. He co-founded and then was secretary and president of the ISP Association of India, where he helped to shepherd the privatization of ISP services. Amitabh conceived and helped to set up critical internet infrastructure projects in India and organizations, for example, the National Internet Exchange of India, NIXI, of which he was founder and CEO. Furthermore, he was on the PII board for 8 years and is now selected to be on the ICANN board from November 2024. Amitabh is currently working on an initiative to develop a technical platform to improve trust and security on the internet, as well has been assigned by the Bureau of Indian Standards to lead a team to develop a standard for network maturity assessment model. Welcome, Amitabh, and thank you for spending the time. All right. Last but not the least, we have one more panelist that is connected via the Zoom platform to us. So Shivangi is a socialist anthropologist of technology. She has a career spanning a decade where she looked at the implications of algorithmic governance, especially in the context of the police and its impact on the marginalized. Her book, Predictive Policing and the Construction of the Criminal, an ethnographic study of Delhi police, was published in 2023. She has a master's in philosophy and a PhD in sociology from the Center for Study of Social Systems, JNU, New Delhi. At IT for Change, she is interested to look at the wider areas of AI and data governance, both at the national and global level. Prior to being a researcher, Shivangi was a tech policy journalist in Delhi and an electronics and communications engineer. She is interested in music and wants to become a trained Hindustani classical singer one fine day. Welcome, Shivangi, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I think at the end of the session, I will be able to manage my notes properly. But we'll get there. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so once again, welcome. And the topic that we have today is actually digital divide and access and inclusion challenges. And we'll also take a look at the security and trust angle. I think, as you all know, right? I mean, literally, we are today at a school. We are at the Indian School of Internet Governance, but we are also at a business school, right? So, but I'll spare you the definitions. But I think everybody of you knows that digital divide is about the unequal access, right, to technology, and all of us have lived or grown up or born into a world where information is key and information is knowledge. So any digital divide, any inequality in terms of access to digital media and resources will have major implications. If you read sources, right, you will see that in India, depending on which statistics you read, between 75% to 90% or so of the population has access to cellular phone, which in India is the main form of access to internet and information, as most of us know. But obviously, still there is a divide. And so the next half an hour to 40 minutes or so, we'll try to speak a little bit about it and kind of take a light on different angles on the topic. All right, so I'll start with, since digital divide starts with access, right? I'll start with Amitabh and really for some of the basic factors, right, that play a role in bridging the digital divide include availability, affordability, and the quality of service, right? Given your experience with Nixie and other things, what are the key access challenges that exist today, and how do you believe we can overcome them, going forward?
Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. I think it's a great question. It's also a very big topic by itself. So 15, 20 minutes, half an hour can probably not do justice, but then I will try to initially touch upon the basic aspects around digital divide and why does it happen, and what are some of the things that are being done to address it, and where we were and where we are now. So we have covered a lot of journey in the last 30 years or so. And why I'm saying 30 years is because I go back to a time in 1994 when telecom services were opened up in the country for private investment. Now that is the time when, and it's very relevant to know the historical context of why we are here, where we are at, is when the telecom services were opened up with the National Telecom Policy in 1994, the tele-density in the country was just about 1.2 or 3 telephones per 100 population. Okay, so we are really poorly connected. Okay, so once private investment started, a lot of things happened. To cut the story short, private operators came in the telecom services, private operators came in the internet domain. Internet was opened up initially as a monopoly service, then the private sector came in 1998. And that is when 1999, the second telecom policy came in. There was a marked jump in the tele-density and access to internet services. Okay, so we started kind of leapfrogging from almost 99 onwards. So from that kind of digital divide where we were actually in an information dark age, and that is the word that we use in the NGO that I've been on the board of for a long time, more about that later. So, and today, in about 25, 26 years from then on, we have 68% people who have access to the internet in the country. So while we have covered a lot of ground from where we were, we still have 32% or almost that much, 32% of people who still are not covered by the digital access or internet access, or they don't have access to digital tools. Now, there are many reasons for it. As everyone knows, one of the stumbling blocks is the availability of networks in many regions of the country. The networks still haven't penetrated those regions. And a big problem, or part of the problem is that India has difficult terrain. There are rural areas, there are mountainous regions, and there are regions which are very remote. So telecom operators have been trying to set up their networks, but it's a difficult task. So it has been taking time. There have been efforts from the government and from the private operators to work together and see how much they can cover with those remote areas with their networks. It will take time, but I am sure that they will get there. And there are different kind of hybrid technologies that are being experimented with. So from 68, maybe the telecom policies keep getting updated, and there's this whole thrust on covering this digital divide. So network availability is one factor, the big factor in keeping people from getting access. That's one part. The other part is even where there are networks, there's an issue of affordability, and I think everyone talks about affordability. And globally, that is a challenge for people. And there is this Broadband Commission of the UN, which laid a principle about what affordability means for internet access, which is about under $2 per GB, and maybe it's just 2% of, not more. It should not be more than 2% of the monthly income of a person to have access. So that's the affordability level that globally is a standard set for being able to afford internet access. In India, we've been very fortunate, again, because of many factors, competition, government policies, and the large number of people who have access today. So from those days, when I talked about earlier in the 90s, today we have 900 plus million people having access to internet. And that's a large number. We are the second highest internet using country in the world, after China, for example. And we'll probably cross that number as well. So it's a huge number, it's a big number, but we still have, like I said, 500 million people not connected. So when it comes to numbers, we have a problem, right? Even though we have great numbers on one side, there's another digital divide issue in terms of numbers, which we still have to cover. So affordability is basically, I think I would say, in India, the data rates have really gone down drastically. One of the cheapest data rates anywhere in the world, probably just about 9 cents per GB. So that actually has resulted in people who have access to consume the highest amount of data per user, per mobile user, for example. It's about 20 GB per month that an average consumer uses. So that's a very high rate of consumption for internet access and data, which is a good sign. But at the same time, we have economic disparities. So there's a large section of society which may have access to the network, and but the problem is that can they afford laptops or mobile smartphones? Now these are the tools that are really required by people to fully utilize the benefits of digital access. So if I want good healthcare access online, if I want good education online, even to sit in exams, for example, online, or if I have to do financial services online, I need digital tools. A lot of people probably are desperately poor and they cannot really afford these tools. So that's a factor which also plays in terms of keeping people away from using digital tools and internet access. So that is a contributory factor towards digital divide as well. So there are three that I touched upon. The fourth aspect would be, of course, literacy of digital tools. A lot of people may not be able to use the smartphones to the extent that they should be using. So the laptops that they can be using, so even if they have access to it, these tools, they may not be able to fully utilize them. So there are a lot of training that is required to be able to fully utilize these tools. So that's one part. The other part, the final part that I would touch upon is trust and security issues online. That also can keep people away from using the digital tools and using internet to the full extent. I think these are subjects we'll touch upon later as we go into the session more deeper. So these are the broad areas, I think, which is keeping a lot of people away from digital access, using digital tools, reluctant to use internet services, not fully trusting it, okay, to have their information safe or private, but that's another subject to discuss. At the same time, like I said, with connectivity, a lot of things are being done. Here, I think there are a lot of organizations which contribute towards mitigating these issues. I know for a fact that there are a lot of these civil society groups, there are NGOs, there are corporate foundations which are setting up centers in rural areas or economically weaker sections of the society in the slum areas. They provide access for free. They set up training centers. They're trying to target women who are generally, there's also an issue of gender divide. And I think the two other panelists, co-panelists will also talk about, the gender gap that we have. So there are issues about socio-economic conditions that also create a problem. There are patriarchal, systems in the society where they keep women away from accessing digital tools. So that's another big factor that we need to address. So people are trying to address that, but again, like I said, large population, large amount of problems, but then that's where we are at.
No, I think very, very nice insights. I mean, I really love your point on looking at affordability, right? From not only from a perspective of the cost of access, but the cost of the tools to access it, right? I think as many times it's being really reflected on that we are very fortunate in terms of the cost of the access, right? But I think you make a key point in saying that it's not only about that, it's also of having the tools and to access it, right? So that's wonderful. I mean, and now just moving a little bit from access to accessibility. So, Niyamita, so if we expand it to accessibility, right? So how does it change the conversation when we talk about digital divide, right? And does this align with what you define as an inclusive access to the internet when we talk about accessibility, in your point of view?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think I will just take on from where Amitabh left off, because I believe that accessibility is a mainstream issue, and I think anything that affects the mainstream affects people with disabilities and senior citizens. So I will answer this question. Maybe let's use accessibility and people with disabilities and as an example to substantiate what you said, right? So when we're talking about, and there is a very thin line blurring access and accessibility, they go hand in hand for me. Maybe access is a little more socio-economic when we're talking about affordability. Assistive technologies come at a cost, right? And many people are not able to afford it. And people with disabilities often need assistive technologies to communicate, to move around, to work. So the affordability of assistive technologies, again, when you're talking about distant places, even if you get a mobile phone, you under some scheme, a person with disability has received a mobile phone, he or she does not get the capability or the training required to use that mobile phone. So very often you could even find other family members using the mobile phone. There is no, you don't go back and check whether they're using the phone. Do they have the network and the content? Do they have access to, so you've given a mobile phone, so are they able to access any services or content using that? So this is how I come to accessibility, and we are talking about if they are to access websites, applications, services, content, that needs to be accessible. Accessible means that your assistive technology can interact with the website, with the application, and give you the same level of comfort to use it, to engage with it, and to perform all the actions which other people, non-assistive technology users do to do whatever you are doing, whether it's studying, whether to sign up for something, whether it's to buy something. And for that, there are internationally standards for accessibility. In India, we have website accessibility guidelines. We also have an accessible ICT standard, which is based on the European procurement standard EN 301549. The Indian standard is called IS 17802, and it's been mandated under law for both public and private organizations and people. So if your technology or your content or whatever you put up there, your services and the processes are accessible, people with disabilities can use it. Now, there is the catch. Many people are not aware of this standard. Many people do not know how to comply. So we have a competency issue. We need to address skill building, both of people with disabilities who are using technology on how to use it and how to access, because they need to understand how to use the technology. And bear in mind, we were talking about availability of technology. We still have technologies a lot more in English than all the Indian languages. So not only do they have to learn the technology, they have to learn English. And then if you have content in regional languages, say, Bengali or Punjabi, the amount of content is very less compared to the English language. So you find very less content on a topic. You don't know if it's in Unicode. You don't know if it's accessible. So we did a survey around this, on Hindi language, and what we were trying to find people who used only Hindi language technology, and we couldn't find anybody. Everybody was bilingual, and even people who spoke primarily Hindi used TalkBack on Android because they couldn't get the whole range of the whole experience of accessing the internet using Hindi technologies. So that I feel is a problem if you want to really address or reach people, in rural areas or far-flung areas. The other, I think that's mainly it for now. I think accessibility determines whether you are able to, use internet or not, because you can have the technology, you can have the know-how, but if the content is not accessible, if the services are not accessible, you're able to get to a website and you find image files, or you have some other, it's not completely navigable through a keyboard, or if there are some other issues, it's very frustrating. You still can't use it. So that there are people who don't have technologies, who have the divide, people who don't have the services or the support system, or who don't know how to use, who have the divide. And there are people who have everything and still there is a divide. And I think that I'll rest there for now. I think the last thing I'd like to say is capability building, which I've already said. It's equally important for technology developers and organizations as people with disabilities. So I'd stop now.
No, okay. Thank you so much, Nimita, for this. I mean, I think just to bind something to what Amitabh said, right? I mean, India has the numbers, right? In anything that you do, you have the huge numbers of population, right? But you also have the huge number of languages and other things, right? And I think the content and availability in language, the complexity of just having so many languages in the same place, right, will always make people to prioritize content creation in a certain language, right? Everybody wants to reach the majority of the people, but then you lose large group of people. In numbers, it's huge, right? Entire countries don't have the numbers that India has. So I can very, very well connect to that. It's a very, very, very important point. So now we look a little bit at, accessibility, and that angle of a digital divide. Now, coming to Shivangi, I just, want to look a little bit at the bigger picture, right? There's other things of digital divide. There are social norms. There is society and what societies expect people to do and not to do. So, Shivangi, what do you think, right? What role do you think society and social norms play when it comes to access?
Hi, good morning, Patrick, and thank you for this platform. So I am quite new to the digital inclusion, digital divide debate. And all of you here, I'm here to learn. But from what I have studied and what I have seen, I think obviously you can have the tools like my co-panelist just said, and you can still not be able to access the internet or the online domain the way probably somebody else would do. And social norms, of course, play a large role, especially in a country like India, where, especially in the case of gender, the society has norms laid out on women's every movement. And so India is probably the only country which has the unique phenomena of shared mobile phones. And these shared mobile phones would especially be given to women by their brothers or their husbands, and they would be told to just use certain, let's say, apps or only for calling. So in certain studies it has been found out that women mostly just kind of read text, they never respond because they are forbidden most of the times, because they would be told that you don't know what to say, or you really don't know, you really don't understand, and they would not be even taught because again there are gender dimensions to skilling, there are gender dimensions to education and all of that. So digital divide or digital inclusion, whatever we may call it, is not just happening in the online domain. It continues from the social domain, right? So wherever you are in the societal picture, in the societal quadrant, is how you kind of start working in the online domain. So if you are a person who's been educated, who knows English, like Nimita just said, or you have those kind of competencies, your online engagement would be completely different. Versus if you're a woman in rural India who would not be educated, obviously not be very well versed in English, and will have a lot of societal pressure to conform in terms of the usage of your mobile phone. Because in India we have certain ideas about how women who are not of good character or who are fast forward women, so to say, that's the slang, use mobile phone or go out and do certain things. Good women don't do certain things, and mobile phone is one of them. I think we've had a lot of politicians talking about how mobile phones are corrupting young people, young women. A lot of parents are worried that women will find certain kind of liberation, probably boyfriends online. So their use is very, very restricted, very, very monitored, and very, very limited. So fine, you've got to call somebody, or you've got to go somewhere and you desperately need the mobile phone for so that the people at home can track you. That is the extent of your mobile phone usage. And many women find workarounds, and we've been fortunate enough to find researchers who are looking at these kind of workarounds. But most women would comply, most women would conform, and they would only use the mobile phone or the internet according to the wishes of the parents or the extended family members. And I think that plays a huge part in how a large section, like 50% of the population, actually uses mobile phones. And because I think they're not using it, they're not a certain market, so a lot of products are not even tailored for them. They don't get services that are made for them. So that kind of feeds into how they again not end up using the internet. So I think that's a vicious thing. And these kind of societal norms, these kind of social problems that we have in terms of internet usage, in terms of digital access, need to be taken, because we need more awareness. We need more programs telling people how, if used properly. Of course, if people are worried about, people using the internet and falling into some kind of a problem, they're not completely wrong, because there are a lot of, I'm sure we're going to touch that in the later part of the panel. There's a lot of online harm that is happening. But the problem is that whenever such a situation arises, it's always the women and the younger women first who are kind of kept away. So first, they are either locked in the house, and now they are locked up away from the digital domain. So yeah, these kind of norms play a huge part in the quality of access, I would say, in India. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ivangi, for this. And I think you gave us a nice bridge right into the second part of the conversation, which is more about trust and security. Whenever I speak to people about digital and trust, right, the first thing I always tell people, right, that trust is more than a like in the internet, right? Many of us are, not many of us, but some of us are, Facebook generation internet users, right? Grown up with or lived with the like button. And but whenever you look at important things in your life, whenever you research anything, you don't depend on likes, right? You depend on trust, and which is very, very different from what you get in ratings and feedbacks on the internet, generally speaking. So coming back to you, Nibinta, right? What does trust mean for you, specifically on the internet, and what are the type of challenges that you see today?
I think trust for me revolves around accessibility. There's a larger understanding of trust is whether if I'm accessing a service or a website, whether that's reliable, it's giving me the service that it says it does, or the content is reliable, and I can use it to do my transaction safely. But specifically, I think I would like to focus on accessibility, because that if inaccessible websites create trust issues for me. Number one, if the messages which ask me whether I consent to something or do not consent to something are not accessible, and very often I come across messages which just read I agree, but my screen reader will not read the do not agree or cancel button, which means I do not have a choice whether I want to consent to something or not. and sometimes they're designed in such a way that even the messages don't get read out. So I consent to something I don't know what I'm consenting to, and I have no choice in the matter. So for me, the choice to decide whether I consent to something, what it is, to what extent that I consent, and what is happening with my data. That's very important for me. I've talked to people and they say that they've keyed in their details somewhere as part of some form, and this guy said, I when I asked for a car loan, they said they wouldn't give it to me because I'm a person with blindness. But where did they get that information from? So clearly the data is not secure. So the assurance that the data is kept safely, and only so much data that is gathered which is required, to the extent that is required. I think all these are very important. Then the ability to, key in your passwords without seeking help, without it getting read out loudly, without having to depend on CAPTCHA, or some audio message which you really cannot understand. I think that's again important. And if I'm looking at just a very simple example, when that pay card machine came, it's touch machine, and if I do not have a tap on my credit card, I need to ask somebody, because if there are no buttons, then I need to give my security code to someone. So at a lot of these issues, I'm not even talking about the generic issues, I think, which are applicable to everybody, but these are at least some of the specific issues relating to, accessibility, which impact trust and your ability to, or let's say, comfort in accessing internet-related services.
Okay. No, that's I think a very interesting perspective, and particularly a total different angle on. I don't know whether I'm still audible on trust. So, but so taking this as a bridge, right, Shivangi, back to you, right? So you already mentioned in your previous answers, right, that there's a trust deficit today in today's online world, right? So how do you think, right, we should deal with that trust deficit and make it and rebuild a more secure and trustworthy internet, in your opinion?
I think, Patrick, trust comes with accountability. So in India right now, for most people, there is no accountability. So let's say I use the internet and I kind of lose some money because of some scam or fraud stuff, and there's a lot of it going on right now. People call you with, they'll ask you your OTP, and most people, nowadays there is a lot of awareness about not giving your OTP, and people have learned. But this used to be a thing where, somebody would call you and ask you about your OTP, and you would give it, and there's a lot of cloning, and there's a lot of data leakage that happens every day. We hear about it, but what we don't really hear is what is being done about it. So we don't really talk about okay, so data leak happened. What did the government or any other person in control did about it? So we don't really know that if tomorrow something happens to me online, where do we go? So there is no accountability in that sense. So we are here, we are using this machine. It's all up to you. It's kind of a very individualistic sort of scenario. We're supposed to be learning about how we are going to be safe online, which is fine, which is great. But there is no overarching structures about. There is the data protection, like Nita just said. Our data is for everybody today. And every day, even if you're not very tech savvy, even if you're not very internet savvy, you would know about how data leaks can ruin things. There are so many financial harms because of that. There is a dark internet where all these data is up for sale. So when all these myths and all these stories are floating around without any overarching accountability, without anybody telling you what's right, what's wrong, what really happened, what doesn't happen, how you can be safe online, I think these kind of fears are only going to grow, and more for people who will not be able to access the right kind of information regarding the way the internet is used. Like because I'm an anthropologist, I take a lot from popular culture. So if you see series like on streaming services, like a series like The Hard, where a lot of women were killed, serially murdered because of a phone, because of a mobile phone, and the guy kind of talked to people using a SIM card and using a phone. So the point is that a lot of people have these myths, have these fears regarding online news, and because they don't see anybody whom they can contact, whom they can talk to, who can allay those fears. I think this kind of safety issue, trust issues will continue till the time we have a certain kind of comprehensive mechanism which will address these fears. And in all directions, from the data leakage, data protection, what all crimes can happen online, all of that needs to be comprehensively catered to. We just cannot be free flowing, okay, we'll do certain digital skilling programs here and there. Those are also very ad hoc. And then think about people to kind of just learn how to use the internet and then be safe online. The onus should not be on the individual. The onus should be structural. It should be from the government. It should be somebody sitting from above telling people that, okay, fine, you use the internet, and if something goes wrong, I am here. Till the time I think that happens, till the time there is 100% accountability, I think that it would be very problematic, because the deeper you go in rural India, even in urban villages, if you speak to people, they're all very wary about the internet. Although they can't stop using it, but they're very wary about what all they could do. And I think that trust needs to be taken. It needs to be won back, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Shivangi. So before we get into the Q&A, there's maybe one last angle I would take, and that's one of the topics that that's very close to my heart, which is about taking digital safety to digital to privacy aspects. And Amitabh, so how do you look at privacy when it comes to access to the internet, and what do you think is the influence of it to digital divide?
Audible? Yeah. Thank you for the question. And I think a lot of ground has been covered by my co-panelists Nimrita and Shivangi in terms of touching upon both privacy and trust issues, because they are interrelated. So you can't really have a big distinction between privacy and trust online. They are interconnected, even though they touch upon our ability to use digital access and tools in certain different ways. So since you asked me about the privacy issue, I would say in a way, trying to restate in a different way as to what they already covered, is about the fact that today online, I am not sure how my data is being collected with or without my consent, how is it being used by those who collect my data, okay, and whether my data is being misused without my knowledge, obviously, for doing any harm anywhere else. So that's the vulnerability in terms of privacy that I would be worried about as a user, and that's a worry for everyone else who's online. There's also the fact that I also do not have a very great, transparent, accountable system where I understand how much I'm under surveillance by agencies. So we all know, at least since we belong to the industry, we know that there is monitoring and interception that is happening all the time. But most users generally will have a tendency to think that yes, they are under surveillance by different agencies, different players behind the scenes, and that's a worrisome problem for everyone. It's a global problem, right? It is something that we talk about in our cybersecurity related discussions globally, and it's a big concern. I think it impinges upon cybersecurity issues, right, a lot. And cybersecurity is, I think, one of the most dominant subjects that actually is the talk of people around the globe, even at all the platforms. Now, the problem is deeper because in India, we haven't had a data protection act for a long time. Okay, so unlike in Europe, we have GDPR, which protected, or at least a sense of protection was available to the users in terms of a strong data protection law. In our case, we have adopted the data protection law, the DPDA Act in 2023 last year, but the rules are still to be framed, and they're still being framed. So it's still not implemented to that extent. Once that is implemented, maybe it'll give out a sense of some amount of, let's say, trustworthiness related to the privacy of our content and data that we put out online. And like you said, social media. Okay, I think there are two sides to this issue. As Indians, I think it's pretty well known that we are not very careful about our sharing of data, unlike in the Western hemisphere, where data protection is taken seriously, privacy is taken very seriously. We are very free with our information sharing about even personal data. I think that's something that will probably have to change. But once the DPDA Act and the rules and regulations come into picture, people will become aware, and then they will have to become more aware of the fact that they need to be protective of their personal data to that extent, and so that they don't. It's going to be a chicken and egg situation. It's not. It's basically just a creation of awareness. It's not that they are going to be protected fully. It's a chicken and mouse game, right? Cat and mouse game, really. Where the bad players will always have an upper hand. They will use your data somehow to do bad things. They will steal your identity, for example. And going forward, we have been talking about quantum technologies coming into play, artificial intelligence coming into play. With that, your privacy would be more under threat because it'll be done so fast and so quickly with the systems, you would not even know who to go after. So that's a challenge that people will face with regards to privacy. So it's an ongoing concern, right? So, and no hard and fast solutions that one can see on the horizon yet.
May I take 2 minutes to just, since we were talking about privacy and the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, we've been having some discussions around this, and just to, kind of give a case study or an example of policy and how different players affect trust, and with the example of persons with disabilities. So there is a section which says if you are a child or a person with a disability and you have to take the consent of the lawful guardian for a person with disability to consent to anything on the internet. And this became quite a big issue recently, and we've been lots of people have raised their voice against it, because this kind of deprives persons with, although the intention is good to protect persons with disabilities, but how would it translate into reality, right? And implementing anything is a problem, right? And does that mean that you would go and ask every time somebody has to say, are you a person with disability? You have to disclose yes. And then, do you have a guardian? What if some people said, what if I don't? But then there is a data out there about me being a person with disability, which is not required. And if I have a lawful guardian, how do you get the consent of a lawful guardian? Does that mean every time I want to download some app for coloring something, you're going to ask permission from my lawful guardian? Or does it mean that if I'm a person who requires a guardian and I cannot anyway understand the question that you're asking, would I answer yes or no, and would that answer at all matter? So there are a whole lot of things to be considered. A lot of this thing is about trust. It works from both sides. So when you're trying to talk about trust, you need to ensure that you can get the opinions of the stakeholders you're working with. Yes, sure, you need some mechanisms to protect. Then talk with the community, work out something which works for the service provider, it should work even for a service provider. You don't want to be going around asking and having all the data and then being responsible for people's data. You don't want to. And that's something I guess the government needs to sit with service providers, with the guardian community, people with disabilities. And that's what I think, that's why I wanted to bring that example here, because we are talking about multi-stakeholder, the importance of multi-stakeholder, and I think this is a good example to give for that.
No, it's wonderful. It's a very, very great point, and it just shows, right, that how important it is to be inclusive when looking at policies, right? I mean, I've read the policy a few times, and I'll read it from my angle, right? And people, I always have very different perspectives and use cases to look at. I think it's a wonderful example. All right, so just doing a time check, right? We want to keep the agenda on track. So I think at this point it might be good to move into questions and answers. So if there's any questions from the room or suggestions, oh, there are a lot. That's great. So. Okay, we'll take 3. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Fred Bossa. I'm coming from Uganda. The speaker mentioned something to do with, I think the cost of internet here, about 9 cents. Is that what he said? per GB. The cost of internet. The cost of internet.
Cost per GB.
No.
Cost of internet.
Okay. Okay. Amazing figures. Okay, you mentioned, but I just wanted to know, are there what specific strategies have been in place to ensure that affordability? And also, I've been to some parts of India, and it's amazing to look at the penetration levels, how people are embracing technology, even those that are not literate. Is it a direct intervention from the government or any other stakeholders? The other one, because in Uganda, government had what we call the social media tax. Even if you had your data bundle, you are required to pay an extra tax for you to access X, Facebook, and then WhatsApp. And that really affects accessibility, but also it hinders affordability. The other question is a food for thought, maybe for the internet society. How can we ensure responsible use of internet, especially for the young generation? As a young parent, I'm really concerned. Thank you.
If I understood correctly, you're talking about how do you ensure responsible use, right?
Yeah.
Of the internet by users.
Hmm.
Okay, I guess. Now, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the responsible use and how do you ensure that, right?
Particularly for children, young people. Yeah.
Sorry?
Particularly for young children and
Young children,
people.
no.
Yeah.
Right. No, I think it's a question that everyone has grappled with since the coming of the digital age. I mean, we as parents have gone through that. Children grew up. We didn't have access to digital tools. We didn't have it, right? Then we grew into it. And then when children came along, they were the digital natives. So they were born with digital tools around them. I think every section of the society will have different responses to this. But universally, I think it is the kind of training that one gets at home to begin with. If your children you're talking about, it's the parents' role that plays a big part in terms of understanding how to use these tools responsibly. Okay, I can personally, relate my experience as to how I dealt with it. Okay, that might just resonate with a lot of people. We came across a lot of parents and our children were young. These tools were new, mobiles were becoming fashionable. Younger and younger children were getting access to the mobiles. Parents were, and I'm talking about the cities and towns where people have money to, buy these tools. So it became almost fashionable to give their children mobiles, right? And then they would walk to the school with the mobiles, and they have to have laptops, right? But then they also did get access to internet, right? Now, internet access threw up a whole lot of questions about safety and security. Bad things happen, right? Now, in my case, I was reluctant to give them when they were very young. I said, okay, let them grow up. But towards the end of the school, once one realized that it is now imperative for the kids to have access to digital tools, they need to learn how to use them, they need to be comfortable with it. I think that reluctance went away. And at the same time, I didn't really become a helicopter parent trying to impose my will and force them into doing something or not doing something. I think Shivangi referred to that. Right now, you're kind of trying to impose upon children and people, especially women, the context that she used. Don't do this, don't do that on the mobiles or laptops, or how to use or not to use. That's something that I avoided totally, and it worked well with the children because they understood that if they are not careful and if they are irresponsible, bad things can happen, and you don't want to get into trouble. So it's just a question of educating young children on a responsible use. And it can be done in many ways. Now, one is I see that giving out mobiles to very young children just because I can afford to or I want to show off can lead to consequences. It happens without the necessary training or necessary guidance on how to use it responsibly. And we see a lot of incidents that happen with kids around on the phone, and how their data is misused and how their identities are misused. And that's something that one needs to start at home. And then, of course, a lot of these organizations that play a part in imparting digital literacy. So it's also up to them to impart that kind of education, where it becomes part of that curriculum on how to use this responsibly, how to safeguard their privacy, their information, what kind of tools and applications are available to safeguard from being harmed. Okay, so we are surrounded by malware, phishing, and scams happening all over the place. Children are vulnerable, right? Children are vulnerable to a lot of sexual abuse material also, and there are policies around it. But then, is that enough? I think it needs to begin with training at home, training by the institutions that, schools, colleges, they all have to keep constantly reinforcing that message on how to use them responsibly, what to avoid, and what they can do or not do with the tools. Yeah. So I think that's the general essence of a constant hammering of was the right thing to do. That's what you need to do.
No, I agree with you. It's really about the balance also, right? How much guidance we provide as parents versus the experience that children have to gain by themselves, right? At a younger age, as parents, we have options to, if they need access to the internet, right? There are tools to somewhat restrict the access, or at least make sure that they're not getting by mistake exposed to something, right? But as they become older, right, they find ways around it, and by that time, we need to make sure that they're mature enough to handle it, right? I think it's a very good question and a very good point.
Does that answer your question, Fred? Yeah.
So I think his other question was it that how we can make sure it's affordable? Was that the question? Okay, what is the, like India is an example, right, of how affordable the internet is. So what has India done differently, right, that it is affordable versus other countries where you have, like the tax on using social media, you have to pay extra, right? Is there any other approaches that, we have done or India has done differently, right, to guarantee the affordability?
Guarantee what? Affordability?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Affordability. That's a favorite topic for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once upon a time when I was paying like 55 rupees for a call on the mobiles.
Yeah.
Okay, for both incoming and outgoing. Yeah. It was a big problem. And 25 years back, sometimes the bills, because I was working in a corporate and handling the industry resolution, was like 25,000 bucks a month. Huge amount of money, but I had a company paying for it. I partly paid for it. Yeah. So affordability was always an issue. So it became a personal touch point for me as well to look at. So I think it started with a whole lot of series of things to make it affordable. Initially, when we started with the liberalization of the telecom industry, telecom resources are very expensive. I mean, I keep giving examples in a lot of different places. Too many details there. But just to give an example, 2 Mbps internet lease line to the US at that time was like 2.5 crore rupees. Okay, it would take 8-9 months. Now that impacted the end user pricing as well, right? Things were expensive at the end user point. But there was always this policy push also at the same time from the government to make things affordable. It was always a policy statement. Let's make telecom services affordable. Let's make it affordable. So every telecom policy that came, or every rule and regulation that followed, was always emphasizing on how to make it affordable. So one of the things that happened was beautifully, the regulator was, the TRI, the regulator came in 97. And one of the first big things that they did was to rationalize the cost of the telecom resources. They really brought it down drastically over a period of time, next 2-3 years. So that helped the internet service providers to kind of also access resources cheaper. Okay, and then there was competition among ISPs and the telecom, there were multiple number of telecom companies. So competition plus a reduction of prices of telecom resources. Yeah, I think it's taking a long time to answer one question, right? Yeah. But anyway, I'll try to cut it short. Again, long stories there. But then competition, cutting down the rates of telecom resources, right? And availability of more and more mobiles. So uptake of mobiles in large numbers, okay? All that market-driven factor that we adopted. A combination of all these actually helped us reduce the pricing to that extent. So, and telecom sector competition was stiff. We had 13 telecom companies, we had hundreds of ISPs. So when they're fighting with each other in the market, it has that good effect on pricing.
Okay, all right. No, thank you so much for this answer. So just we'll do maybe 2 questions really quick, and then we'll use the break.
So we are running short of time, so we'll have to stop here.
Okay.
Sorry about this. It took a long time to answer, right?
Well, in this case, I'll thank you all for participating, obviously, in the panel. It was a nice conversation, and And as we figured out, we have much more to say than that can be covered in the short time. So thank you for that. And I think some of us are around for more time today. So if you have more questions, feel free to approach us and we'll have a chat in the break. So thank you so much.
I'll be happy to talk to anyone who has questions related to my area of understanding.